There are moments when someone says something that reveals more about them than they intended. When a husband calls his successful wife too independent on national television, what he is really saying speaks volumes about insecurity, control, and the fear of a partner who does not need to be saved. What happened on Family Feud in March 2024 would spark a conversation about what healthy relationships really look like and why some men feel threatened by capable women. This is a story about strength being mistaken for defiance, independence being confused with rejection, and the moment when a woman refused to apologize for being competent. It reminds us that the right partner celebrates your strength rather than demanding you diminish it. If you believe that women should never have to make themselves smaller to make their partners feel bigger, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We share stories about people who refuse to dim their light and the moments when truth wins over insecurity. Your support helps us continue bringing these important messages to viewers everywhere. The Harper family from Austin, Texas stood in the Family Feud stage representing what appeared to be a modern, successful couple. 37-year-old Jessica Harper was a senior software engineer at a major tech company, leading a team of 12 developers on cutting-edge artificial intelligence projects. She had built an impressive career over 15 years, earning promotions through skill and dedication. Her salary was substantial, and she had stock options that had appreciated significantly. By any measure, Jessica was professionally successful and financially secure. Her husband, Brian Harper, was 39 years old and worked in sales for a medical device company. He had a decent career and earned a respectable income, though significantly less than Jessica. Brian had been with his company for 8 years, maintaining steady but not spectacular performance. He was good at his job but had not achieved the kind of advancement or recognition that Jessica had earned in her field. They had been married for 9 years and had 2 young children, ages 6 and 4. To outsiders, they seemed to have an ideal modern marriage. They lived in a nice home in a good neighborhood. Their children were enrolled in excellent schools. They took family vacations and posted happy photos on social media. But beneath the surface, there were tensions that had been building for years, tensions that centered on Jessica's success and independence. The problem had started gradually, so subtly that Jessica had not recognized it as a problem at first. When they had gotten married 9 years earlier, they were both in similar places professionally. Jessica was a mid-level developer, and Brian was establishing himself in medical sales. They earned comparable salaries and contributed equally to household expenses. Brian had seemed proud of Jessica's career and supportive of her ambitions. But as Jessica's career had advanced and her income had grown, Brian's attitude had shifted. It started with small comments about how much time she spent at work, suggestions that maybe she did not need to be so focused on her career now that they had children. When Jessica was promoted to team lead, Brian had congratulated her, but also mentioned that he hoped the new position would not mean even more hours away from home. As Jessica continued to advance and her salary surpassed Brian's, the comments became more frequent and more pointed. Brian would make jokes about being a kept man or suggest that maybe he should just quit his job since Jessica made enough to support them. When Jessica made financial decisions about their home or investments, Brian would question whether she had consulted him enough, even though she always did. The phrase "too independent" had entered their arguments about 2 years earlier. It came up when Jessica had purchased a new car without getting Brian's explicit approval first, though she had mentioned she was looking and had the money to buy it outright from her stock earnings. Brian had been upset, saying that she acted too independently and did not consider him in her decisions. Jessica had been confused by this characterization since she had always been independent, and that had never been a problem before. The accusation surfaced again when Jessica had accepted a speaking invitation at a tech conference without checking if Brian could manage the children for the weekend. She had assumed, as they had always done, that they would work it out since they both had demanding careers. But Brian had called it another example of her being too independent, making decisions without considering how they affected him. What Jessica was beginning to understand, though she had not fully articulated it to herself, Was that too independent was code for something else? What Brian really meant was that she did not need him in the ways he wanted to be needed. She could support herself financially. She could make decisions confidently. She could handle problems without requiring rescue. And rather than celebrating these qualities, Brian seemed threatened by them. Jessica had tried to address Brian's concerns in various ways. She made more of an effort to consult him on decisions, even small ones that she would have previously handled on her own. She downplayed her professional achievements to avoid making Brian feel inadequate. She tried to defer to his opinions more often, even when she disagreed. But nothing seemed to be enough. The more successful she became, the more insecure Brian seemed to feel. Their family therapist, whom they had started seeing 6 months earlier, had tried to help Brian understand that Jessica's independence was not a rejection of him, but rather a strength she brought to their partnership. The therapist had explained that healthy relationships involved two whole, capable people choosing to build a life together, not one person needing the other to feel complete. But Brian had struggled to accept this perspective. The Family Feud appearance had been arranged by Jessica's sister as a fun family activity. Jessica had been hesitant, knowing that game shows often asked questions about relationships and that Brian might use the platform to air his grievances. But her sister had been so enthusiastic, and Jessica had not wanted to explain the real reason for her reluctance. So she had agreed, hoping that maybe the experience would be fun and lighthearted. What Jessica did not anticipate was that Brian would use the very public stage of national television to make a statement about his unhappiness with her independence. Sometimes the issues we try to keep private have a way of forcing themselves into the open. The Family Feud taping began with the typical energy and excitement. The Harper family competed against another Texas family, and both teams were showing good spirit and competitiveness. Steve Harvey conducted his usual charming interviews with family members, asking about their backgrounds and relationships. When Steve spoke with Jessica, she mentioned her work in artificial intelligence and software development. Steve's face lit up with interest, and he asked several follow-up questions about what exactly that involved and how she had gotten into such a technical field. Jessica answered confidently and articulately, clearly comfortable discussing her work. Steve was genuinely impressed, commenting on how cool her career was and how important that kind of work would be for the future. As Steve moved on to interview Brian, there was a subtle shift in energy that those watching closely might have noticed. When Steve asked Brian what he did for work, Brian described his sales position, but then immediately added a comment that seemed designed to redirect attention to his marriage dynamics rather than his career. "Yeah, I am in medical sales, but honestly, Steve, the real challenge in my life is being married to someone as independent as Jessica. She does not really need me for anything, you know what I mean." Brian said it with a laugh, as if it were a joke, but there was an edge to his voice that suggested real frustration beneath the humor. Steve's expression changed slightly, picking up on the undertone. Jessica's face flushed, clearly uncomfortable with this topic being raised on national television. Steve, always perceptive about relationship dynamics, pressed a bit further. "What do you mean she does not need you? You have been married 9 years, you have 2 kids together. I am pretty sure she needs you, man." Brian continued, seemingly encouraged by Steve's engagement. "I mean, she makes more money than me, she handles all the big decisions, she has her career completely figured out. Sometimes I feel like I am just along for the ride, you know. She is too independent." The phrase hung in the air, too independent, as if Jessica's capability and success were character flaws rather than achievements. Steve looked at Jessica, who was standing a few feet away, and saw the hurt and frustration on her face. He then looked back at Brian with an expression that suggested he was processing what he had just heard and not particularly liking it. The game began, and for the first few rounds, things proceeded normally. But the tension from Brian's comments lingered. When questions came up about relationships or household dynamics, there was an awkwardness that had not been there before. Then came the question that would bring everything to a head. It was one of those Family Feud prompts designed to be playful and relatable, asking about common complaints in marriages. Steve read the question with his usual animated delivery. Name something wives do that husbands wish they would not. Brian buzzed in first. Without hesitation, he gave his answer: be too independent. The studio fell into an uncomfortable silence. It was not the kind of answer the question was designed to elicit. The survey was looking for things like spending too much money or nagging about chores or leaving clothes on the floor. Being too independent was not a typical complaint, and more importantly, it was a direct shot at Jessica in a very public forum. Steve Harvey looked at the board, clearly not expecting this answer to be there. It was not. He turned back to Brian with an expression that was no longer playful or amused. Sir, I need to ask you something. What exactly do you mean by too independent? Because I got to tell you, from where I am standing, that sounds like you are complaining that your wife is capable and successful. Brian seemed to realize he had stepped into something deeper than he intended, but instead of backing down, he doubled down. I mean, Steve, marriage is supposed to be a partnership, right? But when one person does not really need the other person, does not depend on them, makes all the decisions on their own, it does not feel like a partnership. It feels like I am just there. Steve's expression hardened. He held up his hand to signal to the producers that he needed a moment. The game was being paused because something more important was happening. Sir, I am going to stop you right there, because I think we need to talk about what you just said. You are complaining that your wife is too independent. Let me ask you this. Would you prefer a wife who could not handle things on her own? Would you prefer someone who needed you to rescue her all the time? Would you rather be married to someone who was not capable or successful? Brian struggled to answer. Well, no. I mean, I am proud of what Jessica has accomplished, but it also makes it hard for me to feel needed. Steve was not letting this go. So let me get this straight. Your wife is smart, successful, financially secure, and capable of handling things on her own, and your complaint is that this makes you feel less needed. Sir, do you hear what you are saying? The audience murmured in agreement. Steve turned to Jessica. Mom, I want to hear from you. How do you feel about being called too independent? Jessica took a breath, and when she spoke, years of frustration and hurt came through in her voice. Honestly, Steve, it feels like I am being punished for being competent. Every achievement in my career is turned into evidence that I do not need my husband. Every decision I make confidently is used as proof that I am too independent. I have tried to make myself smaller, to defer more, to ask permission for things I should not need permission for. But it is never enough. The more successful I become, the more it seems to threaten him. She looked directly at Brian. I do need you, Brian. I need a partner who celebrates my success instead of being threatened by it. I need someone who sees my independence as a strength I bring to our marriage, not a problem to be fixed. I need a husband who wants me to be my full self, not a diminished version that makes him feel more important. The studio audience erupted in applause. Steve Harvey nodded, clearly moved by Jessica's words. Steve Harvey stood silent for a moment, then walked over to where Brian and Jessica were standing. His expression was serious, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had seen this dynamic play out too many times. Let me tell you something, and I want both of you to hear this. I have been married multiple times, and I have learned some things the hard way. One of the most important lessons is this: your partner's strength is not your weakness. Your wife being successful does not make you less of a man. Her being capable does not mean she does not need you. It just means she needs you for the right reasons, not because she cannot survive without you. He turned to Brian. Sir, you are looking at this all wrong. You have a wife who is smart, driven, and successful. That is not a problem. That is a blessing. But you are so worried about whether she needs you that you are missing the point. She chose you. She married you. She built a life with you, not because she needed someone to take care of her, but because she wanted to share her life with you. Steve continued. But here is what I think is really going on. You feel threatened because her success highlights your own insecurities. You expected to be the primary breadwinner, the one who made the big decisions, the traditional head of household. And when your wife surpassed you professionally and financially, it challenged your idea of what your role should be. So instead of celebrating her and figuring out what partnership looks like, when you are not the dominant earner, you are trying to make her independence into a problem. Brian stood there, face flushed, clearly uncomfortable with this public analysis of his behavior. But Steve was not finished. Let me tell you what a real man does when his wife is successful. He celebrates it. He supports it. He figures out how to be a partner to a strong woman instead of trying to diminish her strength so he can feel bigger. Because the truth is, there is nothing more attractive or powerful than a man who is secure enough in himself to love a woman who does not need him but chooses him anyway. The audience applauded loudly. Steve turned to Jessica. And you, ma'am, I want to say something to you. Stop making yourself smaller. Stop apologizing for being competent. Stop asking permission to be your full self. The right partner will not be threatened by your success. The right partner will see your independence as one of the things he loves most about you. Jessica had tears in her eyes, clearly moved by having someone validate what she had been feeling for years. Steve continued. Now, Brian, I am going to give you a choice. You can continue down this path of trying to make your wife less than she is so you can feel more important. Or you can do the hard work of dealing with your own insecurity and learning how to be a real partner to a strong woman. One path leads to divorce and regret. The other path leads to a marriage where both people are fully themselves and stronger together. Which one you choose is up to you. Brian stood silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet and shaky. I never thought about it that way. I guess I did not realize how much of this was about my own insecurity rather than anything Jessica was actually doing wrong. Steve nodded. That is the first step, man. Recognizing it. But recognition is not enough. You have got to do the work to change. That means therapy. That means honest conversations. That means figuring out who you are outside of outdated ideas about what a husband should be. He looked at both of them. I am going to recommend something. This game does not matter right now. What matters is your marriage. I want you to use the resources we have here to connect with a professional counselor who specializes in these exact issues. Because what is happening in your marriage is not unique. A lot of couples struggle when traditional gender roles get flipped or when one partner outturns the other. But it is solvable if both people are willing to do the work. Jessica spoke up. We have been in therapy, Steve. But I think Brian has been treating it like something we are doing to fix me rather than to fix our dynamic. Maybe hearing this from someone else, hearing it so clearly, will help him understand that the problem is not my independence. The problem is how he is responding to it. Steve addressed the audience and the cameras. Ladies and gentlemen, what we are witnessing here is important. We live in a time when women are achieving at levels that previous generations could not. And that is beautiful and powerful. But it also means that relationships have to evolve. Men have to learn to be partners to women who do not need them financially, who can make decisions independently, who are fully capable on their own. And that requires security and maturity that not everyone has developed. The game resumed, though with a different energy than before. Brian was quieter, more thoughtful. Jessica seemed liberated, as if finally having her experience validated publicly had lifted a weight she had been carrying. They did not win the game, but that seemed beside the point. Something more important had happened on that stage. After the taping concluded, Steve pulled Brian and Jessica aside for a private conversation. He shared his own experiences with marriage, with insecurity, with learning that love is not about possession or need, but about choice and partnership. He emphasized again that Brian needed to deal with his insecurity, not just for the marriage but for his own well-being. He also told Jessica that she deserved a partner who celebrated her rather than trying to diminish her, and that she should never settle for less than that. When the Family Feud episode featuring the Harper family aired 2 months later, it ignited a national conversation about gender roles, success, and what partnership means in modern marriages. The clip of Steve Harvey's response to Brian calling Jessica too independent went viral immediately, shared millions of times across social media platforms. The hashtag #TooIndependent trending became a rallying cry for women who had experienced similar dynamics in their relationships. Thousands shared stories of being made to feel that their success or capability was a problem, of partners who were threatened rather than supportive, of having to diminish themselves to protect male egos. The stories revealed how common this experience was, cutting across professions, income levels, and backgrounds. Relationship experts and therapists weighed in, explaining that what Brian had expressed was a common issue when traditional gender roles collide with modern realities. They discussed how many men are raised with expectations that they will be primary breadwinners and decision makers, and struggle when their partners match or exceed their achievements. The experts emphasized that this was ultimately about insecurity and control rather than genuine partnership concerns. For Brian and Jessica, the aftermath of the episode was intense. Brian faced significant criticism from friends, colleagues, and strangers who recognized him from the show. People confronted him about his attitude toward Jessica's success. Some of the feedback was harsh, but much of it came from a place of trying to help him see what he could not see before. To his credit, Brian took Steve Harvey's advice seriously. He committed to individual therapy in addition to their couples counseling, specifically working on his issues with masculinity, success, and control. His therapist helped him understand how societal messages about what it meant to be a man had shaped his expectations and insecurities. He worked on separating his sense of self-worth from his role as primary provider and recognizing the many ways he contributed to his family beyond income. Jessica, meanwhile, experienced a shift in how she saw her own situation. Having her experience validated so publicly and emphatically by Steve Harvey helped her recognize that she had been internalizing Brian's insecurity as her problem to solve. She realized she had been making herself smaller in countless ways, downplaying achievements, asking permission for things she did not need permission for, all to manage Brian's feelings. With the support of therapy and the public response to the episode, she began setting clearer boundaries about what she would and would not accept. 6 months after the episode aired, Brian and Jessica agreed to do a follow-up interview. They spoke honestly about the work they had been doing individually and as a couple. Brian acknowledged that watching the episode air had been humiliating, but also necessary. Seeing himself through others' eyes had forced him to confront attitudes and behaviors he had been rationalizing and defending. He spoke about the specific work he had done to address his insecurity. Part of it had been practical, finding ways to contribute to the family and household that were valuable regardless of income. He had taken on more responsibility for parenting and household management, not as a favor to Jessica, but as his equal share. He had also started his own side business, not to compete with Jessica's income, but to create something he felt ownership and pride in. But the deeper work had been internal. He had examined the messages he had internalized about masculinity and success, recognizing how much of his identity had been tied to being the dominant partner financially and professionally. He talked about learning to find security in himself rather than in comparison to others, including his wife. He acknowledged that this was ongoing work, not something he had solved completely, but that he was committed to continuing. Jessica shared her own journey. She talked about how liberating it had been to stop apologizing for her success and capability. She had learned to recognize when she was making herself smaller and to push back against that impulse. She had also worked on communicating more clearly about her needs and expectations, rather than trying to anticipate and manage Brian's insecurity. Importantly, Jessica was honest that their marriage was still a work in progress. She had not decided to stay just because Brian was making an effort. She was staying because she saw genuine change and because she believed their marriage could evolve into something healthier. But she was also clear with Brian that if he reverted to trying to diminish her or make her success into a problem, she would leave. Her independence, which he had once called a flaw, was exactly what gave her the security to set those boundaries. 1 year after the Family Feud appearance, Jessica was invited to speak at a Women in Technology conference. Her talk focused on navigating success when your partner feels threatened by it. She shared her story honestly, including the difficult parts about how she had shrunk herself trying to protect Brian's ego. She talked about the moment on Family Feud when she had finally named the dynamic publicly and how validating that had been. But she also spoke about hope and the possibility of change. She acknowledged that not all relationships could or should be saved when this dynamic existed, but that if both people were willing to do genuine work, evolution was possible. She emphasized that women should never diminish themselves for a partner, but that partners who were willing to confront their own insecurity and do the hard work of growth deserved credit for that effort. The conference presentation was recorded and shared widely, becoming another viral moment for Jessica. She received messages from thousands of women thanking her for articulating an experience many had faced but struggled to name. She also heard from men who recognized themselves in Brian's behavior and were inspired to do their own work on insecurity and control. Steve Harvey continued to reference the Harper family's moment in various interviews and speaking engagements. He talked about how that exchange had crystallized something important about modern relationships and the challenges men face when traditional gender roles no longer apply. He emphasized that real strength in men came from security and the ability to celebrate a partner's success rather than being threatened by it. 2 years after the original episode, academic researchers studying gender dynamics in relationships published a study that specifically referenced the two-independent phenomenon. They examined how many women reported being criticized by partners for being too successful, too capable, or too independent. Their findings showed this was a widespread issue that correlated with relationship dissatisfaction and often preceded divorce. The study also examined what predicted whether couples could successfully navigate this dynamic. The key factors were the male partner's willingness to examine his own insecurity, the female partner's refusal to diminish herself, and both partners' commitment to redefining partnership in ways that did not rely on traditional gender hierarchies. The Harper family's story became a case study in relationship counseling training programs. Therapists used the Family Feud clip to illustrate common dynamics when one partner, particularly the female partner, outturns or outperforms the other. They discussed how to help couples navigate these situations and how to recognize when male insecurity was masquerading as legitimate relationship concerns. 3 years after their original appearance, Brian and Jessica returned to Family Feud for a special episode featuring families with memorable moments. The difference in their dynamic was visible. When Steve asked about Jessica's career, Brian spoke with genuine pride about her accomplishments. When questions arose about household decisions, Brian did not frame Jessica's capability as a problem but as a strength they both benefited from. During the follow-up segment, Steve asked Brian directly about his growth since that first appearance. Brian spoke honestly about the work he had done and continued to do. He acknowledged that he still sometimes felt insecure or threatened, but that he now recognized those feelings as his issue to manage rather than Jessica's behavior to change. He talked about how much richer their marriage had become when he stopped trying to diminish her and instead learned to be a true partner to a strong woman. Jessica shared that the public nature of their initial confrontation, while embarrassing at the time, had ultimately been beneficial. It had forced a reckoning that they might have continued avoiding in private. It had given her validation and support that helped her stand firm in her boundaries, and it had connected them with resources and perspectives that had facilitated real change. The legacy of that Family Feud moment extended beyond the Harper family. It sparked ongoing conversations about what healthy partnerships look like in an era when women are increasingly successful and independent. It challenged men to examine their own insecurities and expectations. It encouraged women to refuse to make themselves smaller for partners who could not handle their strength. 5 years later, the phrase "too independent" had been reclaimed. What had been used as a criticism became a badge of honor. Women proudly described themselves as too independent, meaning capable, successful, and unwilling to diminish themselves for anyone. The phrase served as a reminder that the right partner celebrates your strength rather than demanding you hide it. If this story resonated with you, if you believe that women should never have to make themselves smaller to make their partners feel bigger, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We share stories about people who refuse to dim their light and the courage it takes to demand real partnership. Your support helps us continue bringing these important messages to viewers who need to hear them. Remember Jessica's lesson. Your strength is not a flaw that needs fixing. Your success is not a problem that needs solving. Your independence is not something to apologize for. The right partner will celebrate these qualities rather than being threatened by them. And if someone calls you too independent, recognize it for what it really is: their insecurity trying to become your problem. You deserve a partner who wants you to be your full self, not a diminished version that makes them feel more important.